Some men bring you flowers. Some men write apologies. But when a man who runs the city's criminal underworld hears someone broke your spirit, he doesn't offer a shoulder to cry on. He asks for a name. And then he quietly goes to work burning their life to the ground. The zipper caught just below her shoulder blades. Naomi stood in the center of her cramped bathroom, the harsh fluorescent overhead lights stripping away any illusion of glamour. She twisted her arms backward, her fingers digging into the deep emerald silk, trying to force the metal track upward. It wouldn't budge. She exhaled, leaning her forehead against the cool glass of the mirror. You're really going to wear that. It pulls around the waist, Naomi. You're not 22 anymore. Let's be realistic. Jason's voice didn't echo. It didn't boom. It played in her head with the exact casual, dismissive cadence he had used 3 weeks ago, standing in her doorway with a half-empty beer, picking her apart just for the sport of it. The breakup had followed 2 days later. He had left her with a boxed-up apartment and a profound, lingering exhaustion that she carried around like a physical weight. She forced the zipper up the last 2 inches. The fabric was snug, but it fit perfectly. It didn't matter. She looked in the mirror and only saw the flaws he had mapped out for her. Naomi grabbed her coat. She didn't have time to spiral. The architectural firm she worked for was hosting its annual charity gala at the downtown Museum of Modern Art, and as the senior logistics coordinator, her absence wasn't an option. She was paid to be invisible, efficient, and unflappable. Tonight she just had to pretend the dress wasn't suffocating her. An hour later, the gala was in full swing. The museum floor was a sea of sharp tuxedos and glittering jewelry. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne, navigating the wealthy elite, who clustered around abstract sculptures exchanging hollow pleasantries and corporate gossip. Naomi stood by the service doors, an earpiece tucked behind her dark curls. She held a clipboard, her eyes tracking the movement of the catering staff, the rotation of the valet line, and the perimeter security. She was good at her job. She understood the flow of a room, the unspoken hierarchies, and the subtle cues of people who expected the world to bend to their will. The temperature in the foyer seemed to drop. Naomi looked up from her clipboard. The main double doors opened, and the noise of the room instantly thinned. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a collective, instinctual lowering of voices. Dominic arrived. He didn't walk in like a man trying to be noticed. He didn't have to. Flanking him were 4 men in tailored charcoal suits. They didn't look like standard private security. They moved with a rigid tactical discipline, eyes scanning the upper balconies, bodies positioned to block clear lines of sight from the street windows. They were a military unit operating in a ballroom. In the center of the formation was Dominic, ethnically Korean, sharply handsome, with a jawline that looked like it was cut from the marble statues surrounding them. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than Naomi's salary. He owned the shipping ports. He owned the unions. The city council pretended he was a legitimate logistics CEO, and the police department pretended he didn't exist. He ran the most structured, ruthless syndicate on the eastern seaboard, and for the past 6 months he had been Naomi's most demanding yet polite client. She had handled the real estate acquisitions for his corporate expansions. Dominic stopped near the center of the room. His security detail expanded their perimeter, creating a 6-foot buffer zone around him. Executives and socialites hesitated, wanting to network, but intimidated by the invisible wall his men projected. Naomi sighed, clicked her pen, and stepped away from the service doors. It was her job to greet the VIPs. As she approached the perimeter, one of the security men, a towering wall of muscle named Evan, stepped into her path. Before Evan could even raise a hand, Dominic's voice cut through the low hum of the crowd. "Stand down." The command was quiet, but the absolute authority in his tone made Evan step aside instantly, his posture stiffening. Dominic turned. When his eyes locked onto Naomi, the cold, calculating executive vanished, replaced by something entirely different. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but the hard lines around his mouth softened. "Naomi," he said. His voice was a low rumble, grounded and calm. "Mr. Park," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "Your table is ready near the stage. Section A. If you need anything specific from the kitchen, let me know." "You look tired," he noted. He didn't look at her clipboard. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly into her eyes, reading the micro-expressions she thought she was hiding so well. "It's a big event," she deflected, shifting her weight. The silk of the dress rubbed against her ribs. She instinctively crossed her arms over her stomach, a defensive posture she hated herself for taking. Dominic's eyes tracked the movement. His gaze dropped to her crossed arms, then back to her face. He didn't miss the slight slump in her shoulders, the way she was trying to minimize her own presence in the striking emerald gown. He knew her baseline. He knew she usually commanded a room with quiet, confident authority. Tonight she looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Walk with me," Dominic said. It wasn't a request. He didn't lead her to the high-profile tables. Instead, Dominic guided her toward the far wing of the museum, a dimly lit corridor showcasing massive brutalist metal sculptures. His men followed at a discreet distance, sealing off the entrance to the wing. The noise of the gala faded into a muted, distant hum. They stopped near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. The street lights painted faint yellow grids across the dark glass. Dominic stood beside her, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. "You've been handling the waterfront property acquisitions perfectly. The zoning board folded yesterday." "I'm glad," Naomi said, staring out at the traffic below. "The paperwork was a nightmare." "I didn't bring you over here to talk about zoning permits." Dominic turned his head. "Who did it?" Naomi blinked, her heart giving a strange, uncomfortable thud. "Excuse me. You are wearing a dress designed to draw attention, yet you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to fold yourself into a corner." Dominic said, his voice entirely devoid of judgment. It was purely observational, factual. "Your heart rate is elevated. You aren't making eye contact. Someone put an idea in your head that doesn't belong there." "Who?" Naomi swallowed hard. She wanted to lie. She wanted to give him a corporate smile and tell him she just had a headache. But standing next to him, enveloped in the absolute terrifying safety he seemed to radiate, the exhaustion broke her defenses. "It's stupid," she murmured, looking down at her shoes. "Tell me." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that scraped her throat. She tugged at the fabric near her waist again. I shouldn't have worn this. I knew I shouldn't have." The words spilled out before she could stop them, the shame hot and heavy in her chest. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed angry tears. "My ex called me fat when I bought it. He told me I looked ridiculous." She whispered it, embarrassed by the vulnerability, embarrassed that Jason still had this kind of power over her nervous system. She expected Dominic to offer a polite, awkward platitude. "You look fine. He's a jerk. Don't worry about it." Dominic said nothing. For a long, agonizing moment, the corridor was entirely silent. Naomi watched his face. He didn't react with shock. He didn't offer a gentle smile. Instead, an absolute glacial stillness overtook him. It was the stillness of a predator that had just locked onto a scent. The air around him seemed to grow heavy, charged with a sudden violent static. His jaw tightened, the muscles flexing beneath his skin. "What is his name?" Dominic asked. The warmth was gone from his voice. It was replaced by a flat, terrifying absolute. "Dominic, it's fine. We broke up. It's over." Naomi. He stepped half a pace closer. He didn't touch her, but his proximity demanded her complete attention. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and you are going to tell me. What is his name?" "Jason," she whispered, suddenly aware of the immense coiled power standing in front of her. "Jason Miller." Dominic held her gaze for 2 seconds longer. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, encrypted phone. He turned slightly away from her, dialing a single number. Naomi stood frozen, the silk dress suddenly forgotten. "Evan," Dominic said into the phone. The command was sharp, a general issuing orders to the front line. "I need a full operational profile on a Jason Miller. Start with his employer." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "I don't care what firm he works for. Find out who holds their debt. Buy it. I want him terminated by morning with extreme prejudice. Total blacklist across the sector." Naomi's breath hitched. "Dominic, you don't—" Dominic held up a single finger, silencing her without looking at her. "Next," he continued into the phone. "Pull his financial records, liquidate his primary accounts, route it through the Cayman Shell Corps, make it look like aggressive wire fraud. Lock his credit." He paced a slow, methodical circle near the glass. "Where does he live? Rent or own? If he rents, buy the building. Serve an immediate eviction notice. Cash for keys, midnight tonight. If he refuses, send the collection team to empty the unit onto the pavement. By sunrise, I want this man entirely erased from the functional economy. Do you understand?" He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his jacket. The silence rushed back into the corridor, deafening after the brutal surgical destruction he had just orchestrated. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened physical violence. He had simply dismantled a man's entire existence as easily as ordering a cup of coffee. Dominic turned back to Naomi. The glacial, terrifying enforcer was gone. The softness returned to his eyes, a stark, dizzying contrast to the monster that had just spoken. He stepped close enough that she could smell the expensive cedar and smoke of his cologne. He reached out his large, scarred hand, pausing just inches from her face. When she didn't flinch away, he gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "You look beautiful tonight," Dominic said quietly, his voice a low, steady anchor in the sudden storm he had created. "And by tomorrow morning, the man who told you otherwise won't exist enough to have an opinion." The morning sun felt excessively bright, glaring through the unblended windows of Naomi's apartment and casting harsh geometric shadows across her kitchen floor. She sat at the marble island, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. It was 7 a.m. The gala felt like a fever dream, a bizarre, disjointed hallucination brought on by chronic exhaustion, cheap champagne, and the suffocating grip of that emerald silk dress. Dominic Park had made a phone call. That was all. Just a brief, quiet conversation in a dimly lit museum corridor. She tried to convince herself it was an intimidation tactic. It was a dark theatrical joke meant to snap her out of her depressive spiral. Men like Dominic didn't ruin ordinary lives over a careless, cruel insult. They fought over shipping lanes. They fought over union contracts, waterfront territories, and millions of dollars moving through untraceable offshore accounts. They mobilized their resources for war, not for a bruised ego. Naomi took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, the dark liquid doing nothing to clear the heavy fog in her head. Her phone buzzed violently against the marble counter, shattering the quiet of the apartment. A text from Maya, her junior coordinator at the firm. "Did you see the industry feeds? Check your email. Now." Naomi frowned, setting the mug down. She unlocked her phone and opened her work email. There, sitting at the top of her inbox, was a massive thread forwarded from the firm's compliance department. The subject line read, "Immediate blacklist / Miller account terminated." She clicked the thread. Her eyes scanned the block of text, her pulse quickening with every sentence. Jason's firm, one of the most prestigious urban development groups in the city, had publicly severed all ties with him at 6 a.m. The internal memo cited sudden catastrophic irregularities in his portfolio. Massive SEC violations. Suspicion of aggressive wire fraud routed through Cayman shell corporations. His assets were frozen pending federal investigation. Security had escorted him out of the building before the sun had even fully risen. Naomi stopped breathing. The phone slipped from her grip, clattering against the counter. She stared at the glowing screen as if it were a live explosive. The words blurred into a sickening, dizzying mess. Eviction notice. Liquidate his primary accounts. Total blacklist. Dominic hadn't been joking. He hadn't been posturing for her benefit. He had simply executed a promise. He had looked at the architecture of Jason's life, found the load-bearing walls, and quietly detonated them. The sheer scale of the violence, financial social absolute, terrified her. It was a surgical strike designed to leave a man alive, but entirely hollowed out. But beneath the terror buried under 30 years of societal conditioning, to be polite, to shrink herself, to take the high road and forgive something else flickered. It was warm. It was heavy. It felt dangerously, intoxicatingly like vindication. She dressed for work mechanically, choosing her clothing with the precision of a soldier preparing for a deployment. A structured charcoal blazer, wide-leg wool trousers, a crisp white blouse buttoned to the collarbone. Armor. She needed armor today. The architectural firm was a chaotic hive of activity when she arrived. The massive copy machines hummed in the background. Desk phones rang incessantly, and interns scurried past with rolls of blueprints clutched to their chests. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday. The world hadn't ended. Just Jason's world. Naomi spent the morning buried in spreadsheets, mechanically approving catering invoices and reviewing the security deposits from the gala. She was functioning on autopilot, her brain refusing to fully process the magnitude of the power she had inadvertently unleashed. At 12:15 p.m., the ambient noise in the lobby abruptly ceased. Naomi felt the shift in atmospheric pressure before she even looked up. She raised her eyes from her dual monitors. Dominic stood at the reception desk. He wore a dark navy suit today, the tailoring so precise it looked weaponized. He wore no tie, the top two buttons of his crisp shirt left undone, exposing the faint edge of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. He didn't look like a subterranean crime boss. He looked like a ruthless venture capitalist checking on a volatile investment. Evan, the absolute mountain of a bodyguard, stood silently by the glass double doors, his arms crossed, effectively deterring anyone from entering or leaving the suite. Dominic bypassed the stammering receptionist and walked straight toward Naomi's glass-walled office. He didn't knock. He pushed the heavy glass door open, stepped inside and closed it firmly behind him, sealing them in a sudden heavy quiet. He placed a brown paper bag on her pristine desk. The rich, savory aroma of roasted garlic, seared beef, and ginger instantly filled the sterile, air-conditioned room. "You skipped breakfast," Dominic said. It was a statement of absolute fact, completely devoid of an interrogative lilt. Naomi stared at the grease-spotted bag, then slowly dragged her eyes up to meet his. "How do you possibly know that—" "Your assistant mentioned you only had black coffee when she offered to do a bagel run at 9, Dominic replied. He sat down in the leather chair opposite her desk, unbuttoning his suit jacket and crossing one long leg over the other. He looked entirely at ease, a predator resting comfortably in the sun. "Eat." Naomi pushed her ergonomic keyboard away. She looked at the man who had just dismantled a human life before his morning espresso. "Jason Miller was fired today," she said, her voice dropping to a cautious hushed tone. "His bank accounts are completely frozen. He's being actively investigated for international wire fraud." Dominic met her gaze. His expression remained terrifyingly placid. "Is he—" "Dominic." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the tight grip she had on her composure. "You ruined him. You actually ruined him." I adjusted his reality. Dominic corrected his tone, mild, almost conversational. He operated under the severe delusion that his words had no consequences. He believed he could break things and walk away clean. I simply provided the necessary consequences to correct that delusion. "Now, does the food meet your dietary preferences? Or should I have Evan drive back downtown to fetch something else?" He was compartmentalizing. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe to him, destroying a man's entire existence and buying a woman lunch existed on the exact same spectrum of mundane daily tasks. "Why?" Naomi asked, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "Why would you do that over a dress? Over a stupid, petty comment from a bitter man? Men in your position don't care about things like that. It doesn't make sense." Dominic's eyes darkened. The mild conversational investor vanished instantly. He leaned forward, matching her posture, closing the physical distance between them, until she could see the faint gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Men like me," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, "care about exactly what we choose to care about. Nothing more, nothing less. You spend your entire life organizing the chaos for everyone else. You make sure the lights stay on the permits, clear the tables are set perfectly. You carry the weight of every room you walk into. And you do it quietly, without demanding applause. I will not allow a mediocre, insignificant man to make you feel small in a room that you built." He reached across the smooth wood of the desk. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed gently against the pulse point of her wrist. The touch was searing hot against her cold skin. "Eat your lunch, Naomi," he murmured. "The beef is getting cold, and you have a long afternoon ahead of you." The rain started precisely at 5:30 p.m., a cold, relentless downpour that turned the city streets into slick, reflective mirrors. Naomi stood under the heavy concrete awning of her office building, pulling her trench coat tighter around her body. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement. She was waiting for a rideshare, her mind still replaying Dominic's words on an endless looping track. I adjusted his reality. Naomi. The voice was ragged, desperate. It didn't sound like the arrogant, polished man she had dated for 2 years. Naomi jumped, spinning around. Jason stepped out from the shadows near the underground parking entrance. He looked absolutely entirely destroyed. The tailored suits he usually wore with such effortless pride were gone. He was wearing a damp, wrinkled windbreaker over a stained t-shirt. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around with frantic, paranoid energy. He looked like a ghost, haunting his own life. Jason, Naomi breathed, taking an immediate, instinctual step backward. Her heart hammered against her ribs. You did this, Jason hissed, closing the distance between them with staggering, uneven steps. I don't know who you slept with. I don't know who you talked to, but my entire life is gone. Gone, Naomi. The feds raided my apartment at noon. My landlord threw my stuff onto the street. My cards are declining for a cup of coffee. I didn't do anything. Naomi said, her voice steadying as the initial shock faded. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized the imposing, critical figure that had haunted her mirror was just a pathetic, hollow shell of a man. Don't lie to me, Jason yelled, raising a hand and lunging forward. He meant to grab her arm. He meant to physically pull her into his panic. He never made it. A massive hand clamped down on Jason's shoulder, stopping his forward momentum with the brutal, immovable force of a concrete wall. Evan materialized from the rain. He didn't say a word. He simply squeezed Jason's shoulder, twisting slightly. Jason let out a sharp, breathless whimper of pain, his knees buckling under the sheer pressure of the bodyguard's grip. A sleek black SUV pulled silently up to the curb, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. The rear door opened. Dominic stepped out into the rain. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch at the cold water soaking into the shoulders of his expensive suit. He walked slowly, methodically up the shallow steps toward the awning. The streetlights caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the absolute chilling lack of emotion in his eyes. He stopped 2 feet away from Jason. Evan, Dominic said softly. Release him. Evan let go. Jason stumbled forward, gasping, rubbing his shoulder as he looked up at Dominic in sheer, unadulterated terror. He didn't know who Dominic was, but survival instincts are primal. Jason's instincts were screaming at him to run. You, Jason stammered, backing away. You're the one. Who are you? What do you want from me? Dominic didn't look at Jason. He kept his eyes locked entirely on Naomi. He scanned her face, checking for fear, checking for distress. Finding only shock, he finally turned his attention to the trembling man on the pavement. I am the consequence of your arrogance, Dominic stated. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the sound of the pouring rain with lethal clarity. I was under the impression that you were entirely erased from the functional economy this morning, yet here you are breathing my air. Speaking to a woman who is infinitely out of your jurisdiction. I just wanted to talk to her. Jason pleaded, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had fueled his insults weeks ago was completely eradicated, replaced by the pathetic whining of a cornered rat. Dominic stepped closer. The proximity alone made Jason flinch backward. You do not talk to her, Dominic said, his tone dropping to a dangerous, vibrating frequency. You do not look at her. You do not exist in the same zip code as her. If I hear that you have so much as typed her name into a search engine, The financial ruin you experience today will feel like a gentle inconvenience compared to the physical reality of what I will do to you tomorrow. Am I understood? Why? Jason nodded frantically, tears of absolute panic mixing with the rain on his cheeks. Yes. Yes, I understand. I'm leaving. I'm gone. Evan, Dominic said without looking back. Escort Mr. Miller to the city limits. Ensure he does not return. Evan stepped forward, grabbing Jason by the scruff of his jacket and dragging him effortlessly toward a secondary sedan that had parked quietly behind the SUV. Jason didn't fight back. He went limp, entirely broken. The street grew quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Dominic turned back to Naomi. The lethal enforcer evaporated into the damp night air. He stepped under the awning, shaking the water from his dark hair. He pulled a pristine dry handkerchief from his inner pocket and gently wiped a stray drop of rain from Naomi's cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice returning to that low, steady anchor. Naomi exhaled a long, shaky breath. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. Looking up at Dominic, she realized she had spent her entire life trying to be small enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough to fit into spaces built by men who didn't respect her. "He called me fat," Naomi whispered, looking at the spot where Jason had just been standing. Dominic's hand moved from her cheek, his fingers sliding into the dark curls at the nape of her neck. He pulled her gently but firmly against his chest, shielding her completely from the cold and the damp. He was a blind, foolish man who did not understand the value of the art in front of him, Dominic murmured into her hair. "You are not something to be contained, Naomi. You take up space. You demand the room. And anyone who asks you to shrink will burn." Naomi closed her eyes, resting her head against the solid, immovable wall of his chest. She listened to the steady, calm beat of his heart. She had spent her life organizing chaos, but as Dominic held her in the pouring rain, she realized she finally had someone willing to burn the world down just to keep her warm.
Did Dominic go too far, or did Jason get exactly what he deserved? If you love this deep dive into loyalty, revenge, and the lengths a man will go to protect the woman he cares about, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a dark romance with a fiercely protective lead. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next part of Naomi and Dominic's explosive story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.